Hello there, and welcome to the Meaningful Stitch. This is a special episode, and we have Jackie from Cady Jax Knits with us today, and we are going to be discussing the poetry advent that we've been doing over on Instagram stories. So we have a number of beautiful poems to share with you. But before I do that, I was going to, because I normally share a card at the beginning, I asked Jackie if it was okay. And she said yes. So,
Can't wait.
So this card is drawn from the Archetypes deck by Kim Krans. And this actually came up on Wednesday at one of my group calls. So I drew this card and I thought, wow, I'm going to have to hold on to that one and share it for this weekend, because it's the poet.
Oh.
And then I read the words, and the words were so beautiful that I wanted to share them with you all too. So it says, the poet, the artist, the witness, the truth teller. The poet's work is to feel immensely and not be afraid. They must seek out truth in the darkest corners of the world and carry it back for all to see. This unique capacity resides within us all, regardless of our relationship to creativity. When the poet energy is present, there is a call for deep honesty and reflection, for seeing the big picture within the little one. The poet rides effortlessly between the personal and the universal. It's possible that others may not seem to listen or care about the poet's work, but do not be discouraged. The words of the poet ring true for centuries to come, soothing the wounds of despair and violence that captivate our world. The poet's work is never finished. Find your voice and trust that the wind will carry it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just thought that was so lovely. And then when you look at the card itself, I don't know if you can see, but you can see all these birds. And one thing that I was really noticing that in our poems that we shared over on Instagram this week is we had a lot of bird imagery, which we'll maybe get to. I think it started last week with the crow, and then the hope is a thing with feathers, and then we seem to have continued on. So,
Yes.
But to begin with, just in case anybody didn't watch the previous episode, which was over on Cady Jax Knits podcast on their channel, I'll leave a link to that in the description box, so you can go and find that and watch that too, because there was lovely poems on that too. Do you just want to speak a little bit about what's brought you to poetry and why you wanted to do the poetry advent? And it's a bit of a general question, but
Sure. Well, and also thank you for having me. And I was also wanted to thank everybody who commented on the first podcast that we put up. Yeah. There was a really nice response. Really, I thought just very warm and encouraging, because what a strange thing we're doing in a way.
I know.
And the other thing I couldn't get over after last week was really that it was only our first conversation, really, just the two of us.
I know.
Ever. And it just felt so wonderful. I've been looking forward to coming all week, coming back.
Yay. Well, the energy is such that I'm already overheating, so I'm going to have to take my shawl off.
Well, it's very cold here, so
if I was there, I would pass my shawl to you. Here you go.
So the poetry advent came out of last year. I did a mindfulness advent with Mayor Chapman, and she has a book about mindfulness for women. And I just read a daily excerpt, and it was just a nice, I didn't read it, I posted a chapter a day, but it was a bi-coastal, at least, because I had friends on the East Coast and on the West Coast doing it with me at the same time. So it was a way to connect. And I'm an elementary school teacher. And so this lead up to the holidays, I don't have any extra energy to do, holiday stuff around the home. Like some people have delightful vlogmases along those lines. And we teachers are always just holding on. you know. And so this was something, just a wonderful thing that we could, and I loved the idea of doing it in a collaboration. And what a wonderful experience it has been, not just sharing the work of it, because there is an element of work up to it, but the call and response aspect, and the fact that creating a space to be heard, really heard, in that I know that you're going to listen to my poems and I'm going to listen to yours. And so and it's interesting because we have the different time zone too. I don't know how it works for you, because I wake up in the morning right away, and I like, the first thing I do is I read your poem or post my poem. But your shift must happen at a different time of the day, or I'm very curious.
Well, you would have thought, but I am not what one would term a morning person. So I have a much slower start to the day. And I rarely manage to put together a sentence before 10 o'clock in the morning. So so sometimes it gets to about 11 and I go, okay, now, I feel like I'm sort of moving properly out of the dream time now. Like half the day is over. And I can actually think about poetry and lovely things. So other than where's my cup of tea, which is generally my first thought for about the first hour or so.
I hope to join you in that cycle of time in about another week.
Excellent. So yes, so I generally will start to think about what I want to post sort of probably about mid-morning or so. And so my goal is always to try and get it up before I know you'll be awake.
That's sweet.
So it'll be there, like Advent calendars. For me, it's always it is always a morning thing. You wake up in the morning, and when you were little, and you would have like the Advent calendar that had the doors with the images, the pictures behind it. It was always something that we did like in the morning. And of course, now I've moved into like chocolate Advents and yarn Advents and poetry Advents and all kinds of different Advents. But for me, it still holds that kind of morning connection, a way of greeting the day. And I think what lovelier way to greet the day than with poetry. So
I have a confession. I think I think this week I do need to do a better job of holding your poems, in that sometimes they're ones that are so familiar to me that I love, and what my response might be is, oh, I love that one. But here's and I think this is good about life in general. But then as soon as I encounter your poem, it's like I pivot onto, what do I need to offer?
Yeah.
And that pivot is the whole 24 hours leading up to my offering. There, I don't give myself as much time to receive your poem and be with it. Like I found, and so I am so grateful that we're also doing the YouTubes, because on here, then I can have another round of receiving your poem from you, and how you saw it and meant it, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we had discussed last week was that poems really need to be heard in the world. They need to be spoken. And I think when they are spoken, they demand an engagement that perhaps they don't necessarily always demand when they're written on the page or on the screen, as the case may be. But when we actually hear them being spoken aloud, they demand an active listening and an active engagement. So absolutely, I'll be the same. I will match you in your confession. And yeah, what a lovely thing that we get to meet here, and that we get to explore the poems that we've shared through the week. And also, I think I always think it's like that kind of thing where you've read a novel and you've followed it along chapter by chapter. You've seen the story unfold, But then what happens when you pick that novel up again and you start to read it from the beginning? Well, you already know the plot, you already know the story, you know where it goes, you know the development of the characters. But there is something deeply pleasurable, I think, about rereading, about coming back to it, knowing how the story unfolds. And I feel the same about this with our poetry, you know, over the course of 1 week. I know where the poetry story goes, you know, I know which poems come when, and the connections, some of the connections between them, but being able to, you know, have today and then coming back to them and re-engaging with them again, it feels deeply honoring, I think, of the poetry and also of each other's choices.
I love that. Yeah, one of my favorite lines from Nabokov is, "There's no reading, there's only rereading."
Yes.
And then the other thing I can't help mentioning is there are hundreds of poems hovering around this call that we didn't choose.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you and I both have read so many poems. So each poem, each day, it almost to me is also connected with the 6 other poems I wanted to post that day. But and in the end, I had to just go, you know, you just have to suddenly decide. I guess it's going to be this one. Sometimes it's like, it must be this, but other days it was, you know, could be.
Okay, so maybe we need to do this in like all the poems we didn't choose in Advent.
Lily was like, every month, choose a different poet.
Oh, that would be so delightful.
Yeah.
Well, here's something then that I just want to mention then before we move into looking at each of the poems that we did choose. You know, some of those poems that we're not choosing. I'm finding that sometimes I'm choosing not to share a poem because it doesn't provide, I think, the sentiment that I want to deliver that particular day. I think, you know, I mentioned last week that I think that poetry allows us to say the unsayable. And so it really allows us to tackle, I think, some quite difficult subjects. And so some of my favorite poems are ones that tackle quite difficult subjects. But then the question becomes, is a difficult subject appropriate for a poetry advent, you know, or is it that something, you know, like I say, I want the sentiment. What do I want the sentiment to be? You know, what am I wanting to, what's the feeling that I want to inspire when somebody is going through their Instagram stories and they come across this particular poem? I certainly feel as though I want the feeling to be uplifting and inspiring and engaging and compassionate. And I think, you know, poems about difficult subjects can be all of those things as well. But I kind of fear putting some of those poems in because it doesn't feel like this is quite the right frame for it. I don't know. Do you feel the same?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay,
absolutely.
Good. I'm like, maybe I'm self-censoring for no reason.
No, don't be a poem. And I'm like, oh, yes, I'll say yes to that poem. And then I think, and I'm not putting that on Instagram stories. So we have just called in the need for another. We'll let that develop what it might be. Here, and I'll say another thing. For instance, in our comments, and forgive me, I'm horrible with names, but a woman wrote in who's Norwegian. Did you read?
Yeah, I did.
She referenced a Norwegian poet.
She did.
And then she translated it for us in the comments, and it was so beautiful. And I told her, and we've talked about this, we figured out how we want to celebrate the solstice with hope. Yes. And so, do you want to mention that?
Yeah, well, I think our intention is to have a Zoom gathering that we'll co-host, which you are all invited to. Please bring knitting, your favorite beverage, and a poem if you would like, because it's really going to be an opportunity. We've obviously been having this opportunity to share some of our favorite poems with you, and we would like to open that possibility up to you as well. And I think on the winter solstice. It'll be summer solstice, and if you're joining us from Australia, but winter solstice. And if you want to share a poem that really kind of engages you and which you love and which you would love to share with us, then we would most certainly love to hear that. So, and like I said, equally, if you don't have a poem, that's also completely fine. Just bring your knitting along and be prepared to hear some beautiful poems.
Mm-hmm. I think it might be nice to, like we do here, create maybe a Google Doc for people too, that they can take that away with them, that they can have the poems. And the other thing I think just sounds so exciting to me, given that we're an international knitting community, is having the opportunity to have a poem read in Portuguese or German or Norwegian, and in English, or only in the language if you want, because I'm sure we'd love the sound of it too. But that just seems wonderful to me.
Yeah, me too. So that is all welcomed, and very excited about that. So that'll be on the winter solstice. So that's the 20th of December this year, which is that right? Or do you want to do it on,
and it's
on
a
the Monday?
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yay! So we can pick a good time.
Yeah.
I'm off then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And we'll share all the details and things about that as and when we have them. But we are planning on doing another episode next week. And so we'll have all the details and everything there. But just pencil it into your diaries just now that winter solstice will have an opportunity to dive into knitting and poems.
And it's just so fun. Sorry to cut you off, but maybe you'll be looking around for what poem you want to bring, and you'll find one and another 20.
Yes.
And that's the gift.
Yeah. And then you will feel our pain of having to choose.
Exactly.
The practice of discernment.
Exactly. And just, I know it probably doesn't need to be said aloud to everybody, but it's so delightful working with you. For instance, I made the Google Doc last week, and then I completely forgot to put in your Sunday poem. I opened it up. There was your Sunday poem. I went and I opened it up today, and there you had put in. I mean, so thank you. It's like, working with a competent woman. What a joy. I mean, whatever. We all, you know what I mean. When you don't have to do everything.
Absolutely. I know I do.
Those little things.
I do. Well, will we dive straight in, do you think?
Sure.
Yeah. So I have, I think I can, I've not shared my screen before. So this is new territory for me. Because I know that you've done this lots before with them.
No, it's all new.
So
I have.
I'm pressing the button. Oh, there you go. Google Chrome. Share.
Okay. Oh, there it is.
Yay!
There it is.
Okay. New tech.
It comes from this book, the poem number 6. Ajumma Ombinu. I'm sure I mispronounced her name. She's Nigerian. Do you have are you familiar with her?
I'm not. I love discovering her though. This was a wonderful poem.
So I got this book back in the spring, part of the ongoing conversation that knitters were having about racial inclusion and diversity. And so at that time I was looking at my poets, and while I took several courses on Black women's literature, I still didn't feel like I had enough poets represented. So I got a giant anthology of Rita Dove, and then I decided to try something new and just try out this book, Questions for Ada. And it's probably too much information, but somebody last week asked about, they had a daughter who was new to poetry and what would she like, and these books, Salt, for instance, oh, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name, Nawe Waid, and Milk and Honey, I'm forgetting her name too, but they're very popular um, recent phenomenon and books of poetry from women in the diaspora, I would say. And they're very accessible and short and very absolutely grounded in a woman's experience. Okay, so all that to say that her poems reminded me of, they were in that same genre of truth telling about what it is to be a woman. So this is poem number 6, and it goes, I will teach my daughter how to be a lioness at night and a dove in the morning, how to be so gentle with herself and sing herself back into love with poems, with dance, with tea, with silence and solitude. Oh, I have to read it one more time.
Go for it.
I will teach my daughter how to be a lioness at night and a dove in the morning, how to be so gentle with herself and sing herself back into love with poems, with dance, with tea, with silence and solitude.
Oh, yes. Okay, there we go.
So I wanted to bring in, you had Emily Dickinson. I wanted to bring in the feminine. I wanted to bring in a Black woman's voice. I wanted to bring, and I loved the element of fierceness and tenderness in that poem, and nurturing and movement. I feel like some of those things might be less prominent in male poems. And so I loved all of it. And I literally, like, from reading her poems, for instance, I read one on Instagram stories myself. I took, it was like, what are those little fast things that are up for an hour? Snapchats. I put it up for an hour because I just decided to be avant-garde and read it by a candle. But I literally took a bath that day that I was reading all her poems, and it was just such a good, I am sorry if did you hear that sound?
Yeah, but it's okay.
Okay, this computer, it must do things. I don't know how to stop it.
Don't worry about it.
Anyways, so I just really welcomed that. And my last thing to say about, and I'm so sorry for my poor memory, but this whole line of poetry, I remember Beyonce, when she put that film together, Lemonade. And yeah, and it had a poet all throughout the narrative, and it was so incredibly powerful and refreshing and honest, and just brought in all these elements that sometimes traditional poetry leaves out, says aren't appropriate and whatnot. So I loved that and wanted to share that piece in our Advent too. Yeah. And then a lot of people commented back about hearing it as being good for their daughters. And I, of course, just thought of myself as mothering myself and myself as the daughter and the mother. But yes, it is also good for our daughters too.
I absolutely felt both. I felt it was good advice for my daughter, but also absolutely for the self. And I think that's really what sort of led me to choose the poem that I chose next. But yes, I thought it was a lovely poem. It was not one that I had come across before. I found it deeply captivating and very moving. I think the imagery of the lioness and the dove, and the ferocity and the gentleness, and that we can be both. I think I'm very much a fan of trying to inhabit the full complexity of myself. So I want to be all my contradictions. I don't want to be limited, or I don't want to be I don't want to be curtailed by consistency. I want to be able to show up fully authentically, however I am in that particular moment. And for me, that's a poem that really kind of reflects, you know, two of those aspects of the feminine, which we, you know, you're either labeled as gentle or fierce, but how can you be both? And also, what does gentle ferocity look like, or what does fierce gentleness look like? And then I you know, that really starts to almost feels like a Rubik cube or something. Like I want to I want to explore it a bit more and turn it around and really try it out and see what it means for me moving forward. You know, I think it opens some doors. And I think poetry is a key. Do you know, poetry is a key to the self.
Yes.
And so this feels like one of those, feels like I've been handed a new key. You know, it's a lovely
Yes.
thing.
It was a powerful image, and it struck me too, because I always walk through this one cemetery, and at the crest of the hill there are two ancient Native American mounds that are in the shape of panthers. So there's these two panthers resting on the hill, and at that same spot, you know, huge oak trees, and there are always bluebirds there. So it has like this whole quality of panthers and bluebirds, like the lion and the dove. And also, you would be more familiar with the names. Names just escape me. But there are several Indian goddesses too that I see, and just lots of goddesses surrounded by large cats. So just, I do think it's an image worth coming back to again and again for me. So I was so glad to find that too.
Yeah. Oh. Well, thank you so much for choosing that one, because it is like I said, it was a new one to me, and I'm sure it was a new one to lots of people. So hopefully we'll have the opportunity to dive a bit more into some more of her poems and read poems 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
or the poems we didn't put in this week's Advent.
Yes,
there was
absolutely.
some in that book.
Oh, I'm sure.
Inappropriate poems. No, I'm just kidding. Those are the best ones. Okay, I love that. Moving on.
Inappropriate. Okay, so well, I'll preface the next one then by saying that I chose the next poem because, well, obviously because of the poem that you had chosen before. So when you said that you felt the poem wasn't necessarily about direct addressed to a daughter, but addressed to a part or a facet of the self,
Yes.
that made me think of Annam Cara by John O'Donoghue. And Annam Cara is Gaelic for soul friend, you know, and it felt like the poem that you had shared was a poem from a soul friend. You know, it was advice from a friend of the soul, inviting us into that gentleness and how to take care of our soul. You know, our expression in this lifetime. And so I turned to my copy of Annam Cara, which is quite an old one. It's a bit faded. So this came out in 1997. John O'Donoghue was a wonderful Irish poet, philosopher, and priest. He was quite prolific. He wrote quite a lot of books, and then unfortunately died very suddenly when he was 52 in 2008. I can't quite believe it's been that long, but he really left behind a legacy that is incredibly rich and provides access points into Celtic spirituality. And this particular poem is found at the very beginning of Annam Cara, which is his first book, and it's called Bannacht. And I will just share the screen so you can all see it as I'm seeing it. There we go. So Bannacht, which means blessing in Gaelic, I should say. Bannacht for Josie. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the grey window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may a flock of colours, indigo, red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. when the canvas frays in the cargo thought, and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. I don't even know what to say about it because it just feels like it says everything that it needs to say. What I will say then is John O'Donoghue has written a lot of blessings, and he actually has a book called Benediction, which contains blessings for a whole, there you go, for a whole range of occasions.
Sorry.
That was a wee knock from beyond. He's here.
Hey.
The poet is in the house. Yeah, so he has written lots of blessings, but this was really the first one, the first blessing, I think, that I had really read that had engaged and really met me, actually, I think is the word that I want to say. We had a wonderful blessing at our wedding, on our wedding day, which was a Gaelic blessing, where we turned and faced the congregation and we were blessed for the family that we had been. And then we turned to face each other and we were blessed for the family that we were becoming. And then we turned to face forward and we blessed the family that we would become in the future. And I think that was the first time, I think, that I'd really kind of engaged with a blessing that felt personalized and that I could really engage with. But after that, I would say this is the first, this is the next one where I feel like it was actually engaging me specifically, and that in the reading of it, that I felt blessed. And I felt it again just now when I read it. I felt as though I was being blessed. And yeah, I just find it a truly magical poem. And I don't know what it is, but that very last stanza, and say, so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life, always makes me think of shawls. like a poetry shawl that's been made of words, that's been wrapped around you as a blessing. A holding of sacred space and a place to drop into and come home.
And the image, may a flock of colors, indigo, red, green, and azure blue,
yes,
come to awaken in you a meadow of delight.
Mm.
I often think about, just because I was born and raised in the Midwest, an oak savanna, a meadow, is my, special place.
Yeah.
Even though it's not particularly dramatic, I wasn't born near the sea or in the mountains, so it's where I feel, and so I do love, I love that image so much, and the just a flock of colors. This is a poem I often give people when I feel they need something. This is one of those poems that says the unsayable. It's handing them love, and it's just, and of course, the water imagery and the boat imagery. I mean, just, it's absolutely incredible. And it was funny because in our Instagram stories, you put the second to the last stanza.
Yes.
Which is the most particularly direct blessing part of the poem. And it's interesting. It just feels very much like, well, what are those meditations where you say, may you be healthy, may you become, just, it's just such a wonderful practice in these like impossible times to at least put those words out into the world. I mean, while you need them, yes, but just to be saying them too, it must feel good to say it. So the rest of the poem reads for me like perfection of imagery, you know. But that part in particular, that part is like the spell or whatever.
Yeah.
The part you put in our Instagram.
Yeah. The incantation.
The incantation.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. No, I just love this one so much. So, and he's been around this whole week in my reading, and you know, I've been encountering him again and again. So much to say about him, but I think we'll just let it be the beginning, because that's a masterpiece.
I picked up the book just maybe about an hour ago, and I started reading the prologue, as you do, and then all of a sudden I'm like halfway through the first chapter and I'm going, okay, I really need to put it down now. So if you haven't encountered John O'Donoghue before, then I do highly recommend that you go and explore some of his beautiful texts. They're deeply inspiring. And also there's an On Being podcast episode where he was interviewed, and I think it really gives over a very good sense of him. You know, he came across as a very gentle, very compassionate and very wise soul, and absolutely the kind of person that you would want to have as a soul friend, you know. So I'll put a link to that in the description box as well, so if you want to go and explore his work a little bit more, you can.
I think that's what I hyperlinked on the poem too.
Excellent.
And there's lots of YouTube talks of his, because his voice, it's incredible to hear his voice. And just thinking, I listened to one recently on death that I adored, and anything that he writes or says, you can listen to 10 times, 20 times, over and over. And I'm currently reading Annam Cara to a friend on Marco Polo, and it just feels so nice and purposeful to just, I have no news, there's nothing going on, it's just another day of COVID, but here I'm going to read, you know, a passage and talk about it. It feels really nice. It's a wonderful book. So thank you for bringing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Which then brings us to day 9.
Day 9.
I know. So I'll share the screen so that you can see the next one. Share. There we go.
Oh, okay. So this is a Portuguese poet. Again, I don't know how to say his name. Eugenio de Andrade. I don't know.
I don't
sorry.
speak Portuguese, so unfortunately.
I have a vintage, like Amy, I have a vintage anthology of world poetry in translation or something. And he was in the section on Portuguese poems. And I ended up, I don't know, you know, I'll show you when I'm done. His poems are exquisite in my mind. And how did it respond to your poem? It was just one exquisite poem speaking to another, just laying them down next to each other. So I didn't put the title in English because I thought it gave too much away. I'll say what it is when I'm done, but Os amantes são dinheiro. They had faces open to whoever passed. They had legends and myths and a chill in the heart. They had gardens where the moon strolled hand in hand with the water. They had an angel of stone for a brother. They had, like everyone, the miracle of every day dripping from the roofs and golden eyes glowing with a wilderness of dreams. They were hungry and thirst like animals, and there was silence around the steps. But at every gesture they made, a bird was born from their fingers and dazzled, vanished into space. So that, I thought that I chose it because it could be,
Oh,
Excuse me.
bless you.
Okay, it was called Penniless Lovers, but it could be friendship. It could be our collaboration. It could be that dazzling one another with the poetry. And that's the way I saw it. And it could be that call, you know, that in every day, you know, to take delight and make delight with your attention, with what you notice. And I think our culture puts so much emphasis on romantic love because it is a time where people actually are fairly present in those moments of falling in love to the magic of another person. But that presence could be brought into all sorts of experiences and would yield fruit as well. And I guess I just thought he spoke of it so beautifully. And the line about the myths and the legends, I thought was just I don't know, a gesture toward you because you have so many stories. And I love when you share them. I'm the child here. I hear them and I enjoy it and then they disappear. But you somehow managed to retain them.
Got a filing cabinet for a brain.
Yes. So at any rate, that was my poem for the next day.
Oh, I just loved it. I loved it. And I loved that you left the title in its original language in Portuguese rather than translating it, because I think because I don't speak Portuguese is that it didn't allow me that that hook to pin it on. You know, it left it open, and I really appreciated that. Thank you. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, we'll go on to the next one because I'm noticing that we are.
Oh, okay. We're talking a lot as usual.
We are talking a lot, and we've still got quite a few poems to read. So
I have no idea. I'm passive this time. I'm not
okay. I know we talked a little bit before I pressed the record button, but we didn't speak very much. So.
Yes, I did the same thing to you. I do to Caitlin. No, we can't talk now.
No talkings. No talkings. Okay, so what was it, day 10 then? Yes, day 10. I chose Siegfried Sassoon's Everyone Sang, and I just shared the first stanza in the Instagram story, but here's the poem in its fullness. Everyone sang. Everyone suddenly burst out singing, and I was filled with such delight as prisoned birds must find in freedom, winging wildly across the white orchards and dark green fields, on, and out of sight. Everyone's voice was suddenly lifted, and beauty came like the setting sun. My heart was shaken with tears, and horror drifted away. Oh, but everyone was a bird, and the song was wordless. The singing will never be done. So I chose this one because I live just along the road from the hospital that Siegfried Sassoon was committed to, supposedly with shell shock, but really actually because he objected to the continuation of the war. And it was there that he met Wilfred Owen, the other war poet, and they shared a friendship with one another and encouraged each other's poetry. And this poem came out the year after the war ended, and it was really adopted as a poem about armistice and about, you know, the end of something, at the end of the atrocities of war, and moving into a more into a time of peace. But it's actually also thought that it could be about the men singing in the trenches, and that actually this was a moment of connection and an uprush of song, and that actually that felt appropriate to share, because obviously we're moving through a really difficult times at the moment, and we're not at the end of it, but actually I still think there are opportunities for us to come together in, you know, in our challenges and in our strife and in our grief, and you know, in full face of the horrors that we're encountering with this public health crisis, and be able to find those places of communion and connection. Hoping that, you know, this Poetry Advent is absolutely one of those, but that really wishing people that as they move through this Christmas season, that they have these opportunities to come together and raise your voices together, and feel that sense of connection and togetherness.
That is just lovely. Thank you. It's funny, I just discovered Wilfred Owen this fall, so it's interesting to have you put some more context around him for me, and that poem. I really appreciate the story behind that.
Well, it was pretty sad because, you know, Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen, they met at the Craiglockhart Hydro, which is not very far away from here at all. It's literally a 5-minute walk, and they met there, and then they both went back to the front, and then Wilfred Owen died, I think, just in 1918. So I think they met in 1917, and then he died, I think, just a couple of months or maybe even less time before the war was over. So yeah. And he wrote so a lot of his poetry is published posthumously, and one of them is called Anthem for Doomed Youth, which is certainly one that we encounter in our school system pretty early on. So Wilfred Owen is one of those that we're certainly more familiar with, perhaps, than you would be over in the States.
He was in an anthology of Gregory Orr's that I was reading. I think it was Poetry for Traumatic Times, which is an incredible anthology, and he had dedicated a chapter to his work.
Okay.
And it was very powerful. There were lots of choices for my next poem.
Okay, I'm going to press this share screen again. There we go. Share.
So Hafez is one of the mystics, one of the Sufi poets, and I'm just going to read it and then I'll talk about it. Startled by God. Not like a lone beautiful bird, these poems rise in great white flocks against my mind's vast hills. These poems rise in great white flocks against my mind's vast hills. Startled by God, breaking a branch when his foot touches earth near me. I just want to say, obviously the shape of the poem is incredible, and the line breaks are incredible, and the pace of the poem, the way the words come out, all of that was incredible. Just pointing out while it's still in front of us. And it spoke to our Poetry Advent, of course, for me. And then, but I had to really debate, because the word God is there, which for me is can mean so many things to so many people. And I would never want to put it to impose a meaning on anyone. Also, the word God with a masculine pronoun. But that being said, it still speaks of the quality of an encounter. And I would say one of the most important conversations I've had was with a janitor at my school who was an immigrant from Africa and was a very devout Christian man. And I'm not a person of faith. I'm just interested in all things about different religions and different spiritual ideas, etc. But I told him, that I really admired his faith, and I admire faith in, I would say I admire the works of faith in people of faith. and you know, the manifestation of it. But I said, and even from a small girl, I was very curious. And this is not like Jackie's religious biography channel, so I will just say I asked my Catholic grandmother about it, and she got me a series of picture books, and they were very much like fascinating stories and pictures, but very violent and scary to me. um and so, and then I would keep asking, just as a child. My father was going to be a Catholic priest, and he left the seminary, and so we didn't, you know, didn't have any formal religious upbringing, like I said, other than for us the 12-step program, where we talked about what a higher power was all the time. That was what took the place of that. But at any rate, as a young woman, I would always ask people about it, and it ended up, and most of the time it was offered back to me as, this is what you have to think. If you think this, then you will be. And that was not at all like appealing to me. And so it would go nowhere, but I would still ask again and ask again. And finally I asked, I mean, it's just so moving to me. Okay, well, I will collect myself for a second. I asked this man, and he's just such a simple, humble, wonderful human being who really had to encounter a lot to get where he was. And he said, Jackie, all I ask for you is to listen for the voice of God. He goes, that's where faith comes from. Just listen. And I said, I could do that. And so ever since that conversation, that's what I try to do. I try to just listen for where I might hear it, and it wherever I might hear it. And so I thought that that poem beautifully said that same thing, you know, that it is the personal encounter for the person who's present for it and quiets themselves for it. And there were, and I didn't want the Poetry Advent to turn into like anyone thinking that I was trying to make anyone believe what I believe, but there are just so many poems about the dark, the quiet, the silence, and the necessary silence and necessary solitude. And it does seem so appropriate this time of year to honor the dark and the silent, and also with what we're going through. So it seemed like it spoke to something important. So I put it in there, even if it had some conventional language that may turn some people toward it and some people away from it. You are free to do what you like with these poems.
Oh, I love that, Jackie. Absolutely. And for me, I think God is the voice of the mystery, you know, and the mystery is whatever it means for each and every single one of us. And I think for some that will fit within an organized religious framework, and for others it won't. And I believe that, you know, all of that is equally valid. So absolutely, these are terms, like all poetry terms, all words actually are, they're all signifiers gesturing towards a signified, you know, and within that there's always going to be slippage, and we always have to have an assumption that, you know what I'm trying to say, and you're interpreting it and then responding. And I think with these large terms like God, you know, we're absolutely in that territory where they become almost loaded with so much meaning. But then to be startled by God, asks us to break that free almost from all of that excessive meaning, so that we can actually have a more direct communication, or a more direct experience, like an encounter with the sacred. Yeah. Yes. Oh, thank you so much for choosing that one. I absolutely love it. When it was there on the day, I was like, oh. Gorgeous. Okay, so next one. I'm getting a bit better at this sharing screen thing now. So this one's by Richard Le Gallienne, and it's I meant to do my work today. I meant to do my work today, but a brown bird sang in the apple tree, and a butterfly flitted across the field, and all the leaves were calling me. And the wind went sighing over the land, tossing the grasses to and fro, and a rainbow held out its shining hand. So what could I do but laugh and go? So I really like that one. I really like all of them. They're all my favorites.
Oh my gosh.
But I think that one was so with me. Yes. So this is the one that I shared yesterday. And I think it's one of those poems that quite often gets included in books of children's poems, you know. So, but I think where I was engaging with it yesterday was I have had I've been really busy over this past week, and I had a lot of work to do yesterday in order to meet my self-imposed deadlines. And I really had to give myself permission not to do the work so that I could then turn and do the work. So I didn't actually run away from the work. I did actually show up to the page and do my writing and do everything that needed to be done. But I really had to read that poem and give myself full permission not to do the work so that I could then turn and go, okay, well, I can fully engage with it now. So it was my way of getting around my procrastination. But also I felt, you know, it really spoke to the poem that you had shared before, this startled by God, because it felt like when one was startled by God, what was one to do but was to follow the rainbow and go, you know, and that felt like a delightful continuation.
Yeah, and it even harkens back to the dance, you know, just the joy, you know. It's not, that's the thing I've been wondering about all week with these poems, the way they've been interacting in my mind, is just that it's silence and solitude and bird song and dance and laughter. It's a whole range of those experiences, and I'm glad that we have them all in here too.
Yeah, me too. Okay, my darling. Well, I think that brings us to day 13, which was this morning's poem that you shared.
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
So I found this in David White's The House of Belonging. He opened with this poem. I don't know this poet myself, but I chose it because I just loved the word, you know, the title, Lost. And I feel that there is no shame in being lost. Oddly enough, in our time and in our culture, sometimes we have to pretend we're not lost. So let me read it to you and then I'll talk about it. Lost. Stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger. Must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers. I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you.
Oh, I haven't heard that one before. I haven't seen that one before today, and I just absolutely love it.
Yes.
Really.
And it just it has such an incredible climax with that last line.
Mm.
And I feel like the whole week is embodied in that poem. And then that last line, you must let it find you. It speaks to, I guess, what I've been immersed in all week is this receptive side of the spiritual quest. That it isn't all action, it is surrender, it is it's the feminine receptive side, and so, and to allow for that, and to open your hand or open your heart or open your ears or whatnot, and become quiet enough for that. I think it's an incredible invitation for the time that we're in right now. And it was something that just landed in my, just like for you, it just landed today for me. So I thought I would share that. But I don't have a lot to say about it, other than I'm going to just share a story. Is we had our first snow, and on Friday night, and it was raining and snowing and unpleasant, what people would call unpleasant weather. The roads were bad. It was windy. And of course, for me, that's like the perfect time for me, because that means nobody else will be out. So I put on snow pants, a snow coat, a big hood, and I go out into the woods in that, so that I can have the woods to myself. And the woods where I walk, the land itself just rolls so beautifully. And I was listening to music, and a song came on that was just so good. And it was the first snow, and the whole land, the landscape was white from it. And then this song and this rolling grove of oaks. So I just decided to dance. Me alone out in, and it just felt amazing. It felt like I had these trees as companions, and nobody could see me. And it felt so right. And I felt, honestly, I kind of felt invited to dance by the trees. And so that was a moment of listen. I mean, I wasn't listening like the poem, because I was listening to music, but I was listening with the rest of me to the moment. And times like that are sort of like why we read poetry, and how we can find treasure in our life. And so I feel like that moment is also given to me by the fact that we're doing the Advent, and I'm awake to this right now and not just so busy. So I just want to thank you again for hosting me and doing this with me, and making, I guess there's just this whole side of poetry that we spoke to on the very first Advent, where it can intimidate people. And so if our purpose here is, yes, we want to enjoy ourselves, Amy and I, but also is to have it be an invitation to find the joy in poetry and discover what you like and how it can enter your life. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Jackie. I feel like, one of the things I said earlier was about poetry being a key, and I feel like the poem that you've brought us to, before we open tomorrow's door, is the key to presence, and again, that is kind of where we started with, when we were talking about, can we be with this particular poem today? Can we lean into presence with the words? And I think that what we've managed to do today with today's readings is to really come into full presence with the poems in the way that you're in full presence with the trees and the snow. So, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much, Jackie.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to continue sharing poems over the course of this week. On our Instagram stories. I think it'll be my turn tomorrow. I was going to say, I think it's my turn. It is my turn tomorrow. And I'll be popping that into my Instagram stories. I don't know if you've done this yet, Jackie, but I've put poetry Advent as one of my highlights. Yeah, so you can go on to either of our Instagram profiles, which again will be linked in the description box below, and you'll be able to click on one of our highlights, and you'll be able to see all the poems. And if, like my mum, who just discovered that to get the story to stop, so it stops long enough for you to see it, if you just press your finger on the screen, because I think we forget actually that not everybody. I only found this out relatively recently too. So if you put your finger on the screen when the story is up, it will stop, so it won't go automatically to the next, so that you can actually have a moment or two to read it and to be with the words on the page. So like I was saying, enter into presence with the poem. But that's technologically how you do it. So you press your finger on the screen so that it slows the story down long enough so that you can read it.
And Lily screenshots the ones she wants to keep.
There you go. That's a great idea. Yeah, absolutely. Or my dad was incredibly impressed with your personal anthology of poems. So we've both decided that we're going to do that too. So if there's any poems that we're sharing that you're loving too, then you might want to note them down in your own personal poem anthology.
It was so fun to meet him in the comments.
I know. It was lovely, really lovely.
So the light has shifted here.
Yes, I can see that. So we will wrap things up, but we will be posting another special episode next week. I think we're over on your, are we over on yours next? Yeah, we're over on the Cady Jax channel next week. So we'll share our conversation there. And like I said, we're going to have our winter solstice poetry and knitting gathering on the following Monday. So that's Monday the 20th. And yeah, you'll be invited to come along and share some poetry and some good company with us. And I look forward to welcoming you there too. Okay, my loves.
Bye-bye.